recording. Here we go.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar, NAV Payroll. Payday should be painless. My name is Michael Introvertolo. I'm the Marketing Manager of Solution Systems. Today, we are very fortunate to have Drew Winborn with us from NAV Payroll. Drew is going to handle the presentation and show us their wonderful solution. If you have any questions or comments or whatnot about the presentation, feel free to tweet us at or use the hashtag in your Twitter feed for Payroll SSI. That way we can check it and kind of keep up with it. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass this on over to Drew, and he can get started.
All right. Thank you very much. My name is Drew Winborn, and I'll give you a very brief background on what I've done for the last several years. I was a finance director at Fresh Rice Foods, which makes the product Holy Guacamole, and was in charge of implementing NAV back in late 2000s. And we started looking for a payroll system that was inside, embedded, completely integrated in NAV. And we had trouble finding one. So we did find a couple options, but they were either third-party solutions or outside of NAV or just too expensive for us to afford just on a payroll solution. So after that, we decided to keep running our legacy system parallel with NAV, and which worked okay, but it left us a big void in some of the costing that I was in charge of as being finance director and kind of the profitability analysis person for the company. NAV seems to have the best that I've seen material costing piece to it. I love the way that it's actual cost rolled up from raw materials to the finished good, that it's in real time. You can see in your item ledger exactly what has been posted and the sales value and cost value of that. I always thought that was really, really awesome functionality, but to get to gross margin, you would have to add on your direct labor piece of that. And we kept some labor cost per pound. We used the alternate cost tables to keep some cost per pound in there. We used some outside systems like some access databases and things like that to roll up labor costs, but they were never actual. They were just a kind of a standard cost that we adjusted on a month-to-month basis to roll up into a gross margin per item, however you want to look at it. So from that, that experience of having a little bit of frustration trying to find a payroll system in NAV, and then also feeling like that it brings such great functionality on the costing side, but we had a void there with the labor costing, kind of was the driver for me to start thinking about doing this. But I knew I needed more experience in the NAV world. So once we got purchased by Hormel, I spent a little bit more time there. When my contract ran out, I started implementing NAV as a independent consultant for several NAV resellers, and just wanted to kind of test my theory that this was something that was really needed out there in the NAV world. And so implemented on the finance side, but also helped with a lot of operations things for several different companies and a few different resellers. And kept hearing the same thing over and over again, which was, we're with Kronos or with ADP and it's completely outsourced, but the prices are going through the roof. And, we have to provide those people all the information that they need to run our payroll. So we're basically providing them the hours and the rates and all the info about the employees and everything that they need to run the payroll. And then they're just running it and sending us checks. But then on the back end, we have to book all the expenses and all the balances in the different accounts to keep track of, what we need to be paying our vendors that are providing 401k and things like that. So I just, I heard that story a few times. I heard we do it in-house, but we're running this other system alongside to do payroll. So it kind of validated my initial thought that it could be a good solution if someone came out with a easy to use payroll system that's integrated in NAV. So that's a little bit of my backstory. Started building it a couple years ago, kept a few clients, tried to dwindle down my clients to where I could focus most of my time on building the payroll system and just have a few clients to kind of keep me going as I was, spending most of my time building this. And now for the last about 3 months, this has been my full-time thing. Even though the product was completely built out, we needed to start marketing it and going to shows to show people that we're there and we have a product that can perform. So now we launched a few months ago at Directions, and we have a few customers now. One of them is live. One of them is about to go live. We haven't had any major issues, and things seem to be working really well. So I'm happy to start and show you some of the systems. So to start out, this is, the role center. I have one here with a bunch of different categories. You can categorize your employees into different kind of labor divisions, which will, put them into certain categories that you can analyze their costs and analyze one division against another. We'll get into labor costing a lot deeper here towards the end of the demo. First, I'm going to load some data up and post some payroll documents so you can see how that works. And then we'll look at some of the labor costing features, because those are, to me, the real value add of this system, along with it just being set up pretty simple to use for the end customer. So here we go. Here's our role center in my demo environment. So we'll just start from the beginning with an employee here. So we'll look at Harrison Ford first. So okay, so you have your normal general information up here, nothing really to touch on. Communication, emergency contacts down here. Nothing really to point out there, or too much detail to get into, but we can start talking a little bit about the things down here. So we have an employee posting group. This is set up standard NAV employee posting group way. So basically the employee posting group in combination with the payroll code will dictate where it goes, whether it hits a vendor ledger, hits a GL count as an expense. The nice part about this is that if you're coming from an environment where you have to set up different payroll codes to have things hit different GL accounts. So if you have a warehouse employee and you want it to hit the GL account of like wages warehouse or labor warehouse, and then you have an admin employee and you want that to hit, admin wages, then a lot of times in some systems you have to set up separate payroll codes, which can lead to just a complete enormous list of payroll codes to try to deal with. So luckily that NAV has really done a good job with posting groups. It's the same thing on the customer posting group and item posting group, where you can take a posting group and link it to a different type of customer posting group to dictate what GL account it hits when you sell it, like where the revenue hits. The same exact thing here. So you can have a office posting group, shipping, warehouse, when they see the labor the wage code or payroll code of regular time, then depending on the combination of which one of these posting groups the employee is part of, it'll go to a different GL account without you having to set up a bunch of different payroll codes. So that's a nice feature there. Labor division. So labor division is going to be how you group your employees, and this is the reason it's kind of a subgroup of the posting group. The posting group, you might have warehouse where a bunch of employees all hit the same warehouse GL account line, but you might want to go a little more granular than that. And with this, you can say like warehouse, dock one, or warehouse palletization, or warehouse packing, and really look at your employees in different groups, and then have all their labor expenses in those different groups. Labor cost global application. So the way I've set up my labor costing system is that it's kind of a step-by-step process getting to the most detailed level. So a lot of times we'll have customers that say like, well, we want to tag employee numbers on every single document. So we want, you know, if employee A and B worked on this receipt and employee C and D worked on this production order, then we want to tag those individual employees on those individual documents. With this, it's you have a way to start that's not on that really intense, you know, data tagging or dimension tagging way that you have to like actually individually go to each document and tag the employee. What you can do is start out with this where you make an employee part of all transactions, only production, only receiving, only shipping, or a combination of two of the three. So we'll look at this a little further later in the item ledger and how that works. But it's just a way that you can just set up on the employee card what they're a part of and then not worry about it again. And then kind of step two, if you wanted to go a little more detail, is you can set up employees in a group. So you could have, you know, production mixing room 1, production mixing room 2, and have a bunch of different employees in those groups, and then put those groups on the production orders or on the work center, which would in turn put it on, you know, the production orders that go through the work center. And that would be kind of step two, is getting a little more detailed, but not detailed all the way to the level of trying to put individual employees on individual transactions. Okay, so that's a little bit about the labor costing, which we'll come back to, as I said, later. This is the global cost location code. So if you have a global cost, you know, set up here, global application on the labor, but they only work in one facility, which is normally the case, then you can just put in the location they're part of, and it's not going to start, you know, taking transactions from other locations and making them part of it. It will only stay with that one location code that you put there. Base calendar code isn't set up on this employee because they're a time clock employee. So all their information is going to come in from the time clock, but I will come back to that on another employee and show you how the base calendar code works, because it's very nice for setting up holiday time and not having to remember to like manually key it in as you're doing payroll documents. Okay, so here's your you know, filing information here. We actually have a personal information checkbox in NAV Security. So there's an additional security layer on top of your normal permissions. The normal permissions we have is some, you know, a permission set so that someone can read all of the payroll, you know, section of NAV. There's another permission to be able to modify, you know, any table in the payroll section. And then there's an additional setup, though, in our NAV payroll setup table where you put in the user ID and you check them off as being able to see personal information. And what that includes is social security numbers, salaries, any posted payroll documents, any open payroll documents, or any ledger entries, vendor or GL ledger entries that have an employee number attached to them, which means that, you know, if you're looking in the GL and it has an employee number, then you could very easily derive salary information from that. So all of that will be filtered out in the background without the user being able to unfilter it. So that's a nice, you know, additional security layer on top of standard NAV security to make sure that if someone's a super user, you know, they're the IT person, or, you know, they're someone that implemented the NAV system. So they, you know, need to be able to do pretty much everything in NAV, and they have that super permission that you can just not add them to the payroll user setup table, and then you don't have to worry about them being able to see all this information. Okay, salary information. This is all flow fields flowing from the salary table, and that's because you have different starting dates. So the things to point out here would be you have, you know, any pay cycle, that any standard pay cycle you can pick here, put in the starting date. If someone gets a raise, then you can just put in another line with a different starting date, and it's going to start pulling from that new salary at the appropriate time. So that way you don't have to remember to change it right on that pay cycle when their salary goes up. This use hours detail import. So this means that this employee is going to look to the hours detail table to pull in the hours to the payroll document. So you can set them up without this, and then it's just going to pull in the standard hours. But if this is checked, that means you're either going to enter the hours or you're going to import the hours. And we'll go into that a little bit more detailed later. Okay, direct deposit information. This employee is not a direct deposit employee, so they're going to have a check printed. Withholding allowances, federal withholding allowances. Not much to say about that, but you can do an additional withholding amount or an additional withholding percent. Bonus holding percent is nice because this will override the standard bonus withholding percent that's set up in the calculation. So if you want to withhold 25% from most bonuses, but there's a few employees that want to withhold 35 or 40%, you can set them up here and they'll override when you run the bonuses. State income tax information. So Texas doesn't have anything. Everything's pretty much grayed out here. Other states, though, if we look at an employee in another state, then we can see they have personal exemption allowances right here of 4. Let's go to another state here. So I can show you the dynamic. So you can see basic allowances, additional allowances, and then additional withholding amount. So this is, these captions are changing based on the state. So whatever the state calls their allowances, or if they call them withholdings or deductions or whatever they call them, on the W-4 or the state version of the W-4, then it's going to change the captions down here so that that way it's easy on the user to understand where they need to enter the information. It's not just a guessing game as to because sometimes states can be pretty confusing. In the instruction documents, they might call it one thing, and then on the W-4 call it something else. So we just took the description that's on the state W-4 and we put it in here so that it would populate when you put in that state. Okay, let's look at Kevin Costner here because I want to point out a couple of things. So back to the base calendar, I'm going to click in here to show you what it looks like. You can set up holidays so that they automatically come in. You can have different calendar codes with different holidays because you might have an employee that gets Sunday and Monday off, and then say Christmas falls on Monday or something. Well, then they would probably get Tuesday off for their Christmas holiday, whereas most people in the company would get the day Christmas falls on as the day off. So this is nice because you can set up different calendar codes and link them to different employees, and then it's automatically going to read this table and bring in the holiday. I put in a holiday right here of 4 hours on the 6th because I'm going to run a February payroll period here in a second, and I wanted to show that how it automatically comes into the document for you guys. Okay, login and password. So this is for our employee portal. So the employee does not have to be a NAV user to use the portal. The portal works like a job queue or a web service where it just uses a full user for a split second, where it's writing to a table to approve, writing to the hours table for approval from the manager. So this works in conjunction with this manager user ID, which is set up to be me, so that I can see when they've requested time off and I can go and approve or decline. So we'll take a look at how that works. Refresh. Okay. So we have the accrual usage detail. This is going to show how many hours are remaining. If I want to put in a request here, then I can put in, let's do the 17th. Let's do an earnings go to vacation. We'll do a 4-hour request. Okay, so I'm requesting time off 4 hours on the 10th of February. We'll look at that from the manager perspective here in a second. But let's go back to the main menu and walk through what we have here in the employee portal. Posted payroll processing. So we have, I can send myself an email check stub from the past. We also have request history. So this is going to show last approved and last declined dates. So if they have requested some time to be approved in the future, and then they have forgotten exactly when it was they requested the time, they can come in here and see what their approved vacation time looks like. And then if they want to, they can cancel that, but they have to get once the manager approves it, then they also have to get the manager to cancel it, because the manager would probably want to know that they're actually going to be at work that day instead of be off. Okay, so let's take a look from the manager side of things here. So you can see the 210 that I just put in, the vacation, 4 hours. So now I'm the manager coming in here. I'm going to select this and say it's fine. Select it, approve it. Okay, so now that's approved. That's going to automatically come in to the payroll processing document. It's going to keep track of the manager user ID that approved it, when it was approved. If it's declined, it's going to keep track of the person that declined it and when it was declined. All that history will be there for you. Okay, with that, I think we can move on to importing some time. So what I'm going to do is show you a little bit about the time clock imports we have. So you can see here that we already have built out a time clock cross-reference, because most of the time, time clocks are not going to export the information in exactly, with the employee numbers and everything that are set up in NAV. So what you can do here is put in a cross-reference number. You can add employees to this anytime you need to add them. Another nice feature of this is that you can take the earnings codes that are in certain columns. So sometimes what happens is your time clock exports info like this with different earnings codes across the top. If that's the case, then we have this set up where you actually just put in the column number of where the earning code time is going to come from. And again, the point of kind of showing you this, it's a little bit, detailed, but it's that, we have tried to build a real flexible system that can integrate with, wherever the time may be coming from. So we wanted to show that, we don't have to spend a bunch of hours of development and stuff doing integrations to time clocks, because we already have an integration that can suck it in from different columns. And then the one that I'm going to actually do right here is going to be a different layout. So it's going to be with the employee number, date, earnings code. So this time clock is actually going to give me an earnings code, and then it's going to give me the hours. So I'm going to import that. It'll tell me the hours are successfully imported. Okay. While I'm here, I also want to show that there is another way to enter hours. So you can simply just enter hours. So you can pick the employee, pick the date that you want to do, 0301 or something like that, the earnings code of regular, and then the number of hours. So you can enter hours in this form and then register the hours, which sends them to the hours detail table, which will come into the payroll document. That's a little tedious, especially if you have a bunch of employees. So you can suggest lines. You can bring in their standard weekly hours. You can do something like 10th. If you have any holiday hours that are part of that week, you can put them right here. It'll automatically insert the holiday hours and reduce the regular hours and put in the holiday code. And then you can see there when I click it, it automatically populates. I only have 2 employees that are set to use time detail. All the rest are salary, but it automatically populates those. And if there was 100 of them, it would automatically populate all 100. So again, we know that not everybody does everything, exactly the same way. So we've tried to build, whether you can use salary employees that automatically just brings in their salary, for detailed hours type employees that are coming from time clocks or time entry. Several different methods to be able to do it are already built in. All right. So let's just go on to a payroll processing document. I'm going to use Harrison Forward here. Do week 6, I believe, is the time that I imported. I'm going to pick the regular. While I'm here on this screen, I just want to point out that there's different calculation methods, and the reason there are is because sometimes you might want to use, most of the time you'll just use one over and over again, but sometimes you might be doing bonuses and you don't want to do all the deductions that normally come in during regular time. So you can set up different calculation methods that exclude different types of deductions or whatever it may be, so that you don't have to manually delete those lines or manually add lines. It's already set up in a template that brings everything in that needs to be brought in. So you can see when I hit regular, everything comes in. You'll notice here that holiday came in. If I look at the hours detail, you'll see that's because from my time clock, I imported some holiday hours, so it automatically brought those in. So from here, I'm just going to, this is actually a print check employee, not a direct deposit. So I'm going to go ahead and print a check. Okay, so here's what our standard check looks like. Any of these fields in the stub can be kind of shifted around. So if you have a different layout, we can definitely make some modifications to our standard check to make it work for you. And then I'm just going to post the document. Okay, I'm going to do one more individual document. Okay. All right. One thing I wanted to point out here, the reason I wanted to do one more is because you'll notice that on the hours detail, this came all over as regular, but we know based on our setups that over 40 hours is overtime. So it automatically put the extra 7 hours here to the overtime line. Okay, so now we'll just print the check. Okay. Looks good. And post. All right, so now let's move on to some salary employees, and we're going to go through the batch payroll processing, which is, you know, the way that most people will process payroll. So I'm going to go ahead and do 215. We're going to do the first week of February. First half of the month. You'll notice that direct deposit employee is checked off as yes. So that you can easily separate, and it's recommended, you know, we'd recommend that you'd separate if you have print check employees and you have direct deposit, selecting the correct lines to do the ACH file with all your print check employees inside of the batch is a little bit difficult. It's a little cumbersome. Seems easier to just filter your direct deposit employees out, bring those in, do that, and then come back and do the print check or vice versa. So you can see my 4 employees come in here. What I'd like to note here is that the 4 hours of vacation time automatically came in from the approvals that we approved when he requested the 4 hours. And you can see this line summary here shows all the different codes that are on this line and the amounts. And then the batch summary shows everything. If you want to see the individual document, you can hit payroll document up here. Another thing to note that's a very nice feature here is that if you just needed to add some time, like sick time, you can just add it. And then it's going to insert the line automatically and recalc everything. So if I go to my payroll document now, you'll see sick times right there. If I change it back to 0, you'll see it adds it back to regular and removes the line. So you can actually add time here right from the batch and into the header of the document, which will adjust all the lines and recalc them automatically, which will save a lot of time for the users typically. So I'm going to export the ACH file. You'll see that they all show as exported. I'm going to email all my check stubs out. So this is going to look to the email address that's set up on the employee's card. And then it's going to start coming through here. I have them all linked to me. So we can look here. So there's the first one. So you can see the holiday, Kevin Costner, holiday vacation pay that we approved. All is employer contributions, deductions, withholdings, net pay, and then you can see the check stub, the actual stub with the remittance advice that's going to get put on the ACH file and go to the bank. So that'd be the way that you would reference that if you needed to look for it in the bank entries. Okay, so 4 check stubs have been successfully emailed. Okay, so now I'm going to transmit my ACH file. Let's notice that all of this changes to transmitted. This is all standard ACH functionality from base NAV that we've used in our payroll batches and individual documents. So now I'm ready to post. Okay, 4 payroll documents posted. So now that we've posted some documents, I want to show you a couple added features that we have. So we have a website that I would encourage all of you to go check out. Payday should be painless is our slogan. But we also have a manual section here. So if you have a username and password that we can provide customers, then you can come in here and you can look for almost anything that we have in our payroll system will be here with screenshots showing you how to do it. So we try as hard as we can to make it where you don't have to constantly be emailing and asking questions, and you can just read through the manuals if you forget how to do a certain process and be reminded of exactly what you need to do to set that up. So you can see deductions, how to process individual payroll documents. You can see, takes you through the menu. Of course, you can search for anything in NAV, but shows you where it is in the menu, shows you what you need to select, how you need to suggest lines, how you can modify sick and vacation like I just showed. Another very helpful feature of this, because of the nature of NAV errors at times, is you can search. So if I search for pay cycle, then you can see errors in troubleshooting pay cycle period. So here's the most common error we have when the pay cycle associated with the pay cycle period would be that it's just left blank. So this, if you search for that, you could see that, oh, the pay cycle is left blank, and so it won't let me suggest lines. But it really comes in handy when you have a error that really tells you nothing. And so my most hated error is probably nothing to export. That's the one that just gets me, because it just doesn't tell you anything about what you need to do. So this is an ACH related error. And since we kept standard, ACH functionality from base NAV in our payroll module or add-on, it's an error that still would occur with us if there is no direct deposit information set up. So you can see that not only do we tell you about the direct deposit information not being set up, but a couple other things that could be the problem as well that's causing this. This just means the ACH code unit that's running trying to create the ACH file isn't finding anything to export, but it just doesn't give you any info on what to do. So that's a little bit about the manuals. I think that now we can show you a little bit about reporting. Let me just go to reports. Okay, so we have your standard employee, personal information, wage information. The payroll tax difference report is very nice because the payroll tax difference will look at what you have actually booked, say for like state unemployment insurance, something like that, and then it will compare it to the calculated amount based on the rate in the tax table, and it'll give you a difference. And then if you want to, it'll allow you to load a journal. So this is, this down here in the correction, it'll ask you what journal batch you want to load, and it'll load you the difference. So you can just go ahead and post the difference right away and correct that. The 941 and 940, pretty self-explanatory there. I really want to get into, though, the payroll report here. So this report, of course, no matter how hard you try, you can never make a report that does everything for everyone. But this is our best attempt. So the way this works is you can run things on just regular open documents or ledger entries. So you have the option to run, if you want to check all your payroll open documents before you post them, you can run it on open documents. If you want to look at something in history, you can run it on ledger entries. You can pick the level that you want to see. So employee, posting group, division code, SUDA income tax state. And you can pick how you want to group by. So entry type, payroll code, or custom layout. We'll get into custom layout in a second because that's the one that really provides the user a lot of value when designing their own reports. So we'll just look at the payroll code one for now. We'll leave it open where all the filters don't have anything in them. And you can see this is your standard type of report you would pull from other payroll systems that just split everything into a million different codes across the page and give you the totals. But it can be helpful if you're looking for just a certain total of a certain few codes or whatever, and you want to just run it for all and then send it to Excel or something and get those certain codes. But what I like to do is go to the custom layout. So if we look at this custom layout of demo, for example, what we're doing here is we're pulling in all the codes that we want to group together and then just giving them a caption. So it's real simple to do. We can just click in here. Let's say we want to also pull in employer contributions. So we can pull in employer contribution. Okay. Maybe we also want to pull in employer expenses. So we're kind of looking for a fully loaded labor cost here. So we're going to pull in employer taxes. Okay, so all those codes load just by highlighting and clicking OK. We'll call this employer tax. And then you'll notice up here I also have this show hours worked. So this is also going to bring in the amount of hours worked by employee for whatever time frame it is that I'm looking at here. Which in our case is just a couple payroll periods at the beginning of the year. So when I click OK on this and then click OK to bring it into the custom layout, tab off of it, you'll notice that show hours worked gets checked. This changes to custom layout. This changes to employee, and this changes to ledger entry. So everything that's set up in the custom layout automatically loads in here, so you don't have to change it every time. Okay. So when we show it, we see our hours worked over here. We see our earnings. We see our employer contributions and our employer taxes. So we have, between these three columns, the fully loaded labor cost for these payroll periods that we've posted. Pretty nice. So let me show you another way that this can be used. And this can be used, of course, this is great for like state form. If you have a state form and you need some certain codes pulled together for that, or you have, or you want to reconcile, say you want to reconcile SUDA. So you want to pull in your total earnings and then your total SUDA expense column by column, columns next to each other, so that you can check and make sure that every employee, that had over the earnings limit of 7,000 or whatever it is, 9,000, was had the full amount in the SUDA column as well. It's it's great for recs like that. It's also great for EFTPS deposit, because you'll notice in the EFTPS deposit I have things laid out here. The PTO is something I added just when I was showing this to someone. But the main thing is the way that the EFTPS website has it laid out is Social Security, then Medicare, then federal tax withholding. So I actually did those three right in the correct order. I brought in both sides of FICA Medicare and both sides of FICA Social Security. I'm going to bring in my hours worked, and then, okay, tab off, okay, all of these. Now let's just say I don't want to run it this time for hours worked. I can uncheck that, no big deal. Even though the template has it in there, you can modify these checkboxes. Okay, so there it is, Social Security, Medicare, federal tax withholding, total earnings, and my hours worked doesn't show up. So very simple way to get the information you're looking for quickly, group it quickly, or go into as much detail by payroll code that you need. Okay. I think that's about it for the payroll report, but I'll be happy to answer any other questions that might come up from seeing that little demo of it. Another thing I want to point out before we look at labor cost is, let's look at the payroll ledger. So of course, first let's talk about, I guess, printed checks. So after you print a check, if you haven't posted the document, you can always void the check, just like the standard NAV void to check technology. It's really easy to do. Hit void, it's voided. You can print another check if something happened with the check, or if you needed to make an adjustment to the payroll document before you printed the check. That's easy to do. Same thing with ACH. If you export and then you see that there's a problem with the ACH file or something, you can void that export and then you can re-export it. But if you already have posted the document, then reversing payroll documents can be a real pain because you have all these withholdings and deductions and everything, and the whole thing pretty much has to be reversed as one. You can't really reverse one thing at a time because they're usually dependent on each other. So we do have a reverse transaction. What it does is it brings in everything that's associated. So you can see, there's payroll entry types, which are from the payroll ledger, accrual entry types, which are accruing vacation time and things like that, vendor ledger entries, GL entries. So it brings in everything associated with the transaction. You can simply hit reverse, and the entries were successfully reversed. As soon as I go back to my payroll ledger, they're all disappeared because I have this reversed automatically set to no. But if I ever wanted to see them, then I could see them here, and you'll see that my column reversed is set off. So everything now in the GL is reversed, the vendor ledgers are reversed, and the check is financially voided. So really easy way to fix something if there's ever a problem. Also, there's reverse multiple entries. So you can set a document range to reverse, and then it'll reverse every document in that range, or you can just reverse everything on a payroll document. So everything on a payment date. So if you have a payment date for the week and the whole week is messed up, you can put it in here and reverse everything like it never happened. Okay. Now moving on to, let's look at the labor ledger. Okay. So the labor costs that we started out talking about in the employee card, we can look at labor cost details. So you can see Harrison Ford, like we discussed, is part of all transactions. So one thing you'll notice as we go through here is that his name is going to show up on all these transactions, because let's just say he's the plant supervisor. So we want to classify him as direct labor, but we want him to, he's going to be part of shipments, receipts, production, everything. So his cost per unit of labor is going to be a lot lower than the other people, because his labor units are going to be all inclusive of all labor units that went through the plant in any way during that pay period. So you can see that the total cost of this transaction for him is $427, and the total cost of the receiving guy, James Franco, is $938. But it's not because James Franco is, slacking off or anything. It's just because he's only part of the receiving transactions. He's not a part of everything, and Harrison Ford is part of everything. Okay, so let's keep going down here to an output line. You can see Harrison Ford's in there again. And then we have Madeline Stowe and Tom Sizemore. And Tom Sizemore just makes a lot more money than Madeline Stowe does, I guess, because his cost per unit is a lot higher, but they have the same number of labor units associated with this transaction. So the total cost is $2,200 versus $8,000 for him, and only $8 for Harrison Ford, because again, he's part of all transactions. Go to shipping. You can see we have two shippers. So you can see that one of them cost you $341 per unit, the other one $413 per unit. Here's our totals, and again, Harrison Ford's up there. Okay, and then it rolls everything up. So if there's a sale entry, you can click here, you can see your total receiving cost, total production cost, total shipping cost, and total labor cost. So your cost of goods sold now, after direct labor, is right in your item ledger. It's just material, your sales value minus your material cost minus your total cost of goods sold. There's your gross margin. No more, you don't have to jump through any more hoops or do any more VLOOKUPs or sum ifs in Excel, it's all right there in the item ledger now because you have your payroll system in NAV. Another thing I'd like to point out is that, the receiving cost associated with this transaction is $273. But if we look at the raw materials that were received, the labor cost was like $2,730, something like that. So the reason that is because we didn't consume all 50,000 of these into this product that we shipped. We only consumed 5,000. So it properly allocated the amount of labor cost that was associated with only those 5,000 that were inside of the finished good. And then it shipped, put that labor cost on it and when we shipped it out. So it's exactly like the material costing. That's it. Like I said at the beginning, I absolutely love that model of how it takes, if you have $500 and, you have 1,000 units and you use 500 of those units, then it's only going to put $250 into the finished good because, you're only using half of the number of units. So it's only going to take half the cost away and put it into the finished good. Exact same thing here with the labor costing. I liked it so much that I used that exact methodology. So it's all about the number of units that you attach the people to that are on the floor as to, how many units are they touching as part of shipping, part of production, that is going to drive what their labor cost per unit is, and in turn drive, your cost of goods sold when you sell the item. Another thing to point out about this is that in the NAV payroll setup table, you can specify your labor cost unit of measure. So right here, you could have, instead of pounds or kilos or ounces or something uniform like that, you could have a labor unit of measure cost, which is something like a throughput, where you actually look at how long it takes different items to move through your plant, and you assign different numbers of units based on how slow they are or how fast they are, which will give you even a more accurate picture. Because, if someone's sitting over there making 2-ounce bags and another guy's making 8-pound, big bulk bags, then the guy making 8-pound big bulk bags is going to have a ton more pounds associated with his labor cost than the person that's having to package the 2-ounce unit. So a throughput sometimes can be the best way, or sometimes called a runtime, to make sure that these labor figures are accurate. But it can be any unit of measure that's set up in your unit of measure table, and you just have to make sure that unit of measure is set on your items, the throughput unit of measure or whatever it may be. Okay. So that is, I could talk about labor cost for another hour. I absolutely love the functionality that's built in here now and how easy it is to get to gross margin. But we'll move on back to some more nuts and bolts of payroll. So I do want to look at the setups, not go into super detail on these, but I do want to just show that the earnings codes and deductions are easy to set up, and they're standard NAV functionality. So you can see the payroll code in combination with the posting group is linked to a GL account, and then you can pull that GL account, or you can link it, as we have here in the withholdings and deductions. You can link it directly to a vendor. So if you want to, you can see here, like the garnishments are linked to the Attorney General, the health insurance is linked to the health insurance vendor, your FICA is linked to EFTPS. So you can hit vendors directly, or you can run it through a GL account. Some customers like to run it through a GL account and then just input a purchase invoice and hit that same GL account when they get an invoice from their 401k provider or whatever. Either way, easy to set up, standard NAV setups. Put in the code, put in the posting group, put in the payroll type, and then put in the account type, GL. Usually it's going to be GL or vendor, and then pick either your GL account or your vendor. For your employer taxes, these are going to have two sides to the transaction. So they're going to have your debit or expense account on the income statement, and then they're going to have the credit account where you're booking the liability to the vendor. But it's all very familiar if you're familiar with the NAV posting setups. I don't think I really have much else to say, so I think we've got a little bit of time left, but I'm pretty much done with the demo, and I was able to run through everything that I wanted to talk about. So I guess we can flip it back to you. And if you have any closing comments that you want to make, then that would be great.
Thank you so much for presenting the your product. Integration as well. The layout is phenomenal. Really enjoyed it. Let's see here. Let me just take back presentation real quick.
Sure.
And let me do. Let's make sure everybody can see my screen. All right. If anybody has any questions going forward, you can reach out to me, and we'll definitely get in touch with NAV Payroll, or you can tweet your questions as long as you use the hashtag Payroll SSI that you see at the bottom of your screen. Once again, I want to thank NAV Payroll and Whit and Drew for the presentation and all the help they provided over the past couple weeks, and we look forward to working with you guys. And thanks again.
All right. Thank you.